Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Lois.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, David.
Mhm.
And I just want to reiterate that I was making a compliment about our class.
Oh,
I was not,
please. You know
I
I
was
was
not,
teasing.
I know, I just didn't want it to be left with that notion that somehow I find learning with you somehow easy or
Yeah.
taking it easy. Far from it. Okay.
Or maybe it was that your father liked listening to it, our class.
Yes, that's also true.
See, you can interpret it anyway.
Yeah, I meant it for just a very narrow interpretation. The most narrow of interpretations.
What was the problem?
Rabbi, yesterday
Yeah.
I listened to Barry Weiss interviewing, what is her name? Lucy Harishi, who's married to the actor who was in Fauda. She's Palestinian Muslim and he's Jewish. And it was pretty interesting. And she said she grew up the only Palestinian family in Dimona. And Barry Weiss never asked her why. Why were you there? Why were you the only one? But maybe her father was a scientist, and that's when they were working
The
on.
nuclear stuff.
Yeah.
You know, part of my work, my own personal avodas Hashem, is to remain empathetic and it's very hard when there is so much suffering. But my experience in Israel, my direct experience, did show me how hard it would be for a well-meaning Palestinian to be a citizen of Israel, and 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 then for the ones that are not citizens, how hard it would be to live as a Palestinian under the control of Israel, and then how much more so the people that are afraid of being killed, and the people that are injured and the ones that are actually killed. And they are human beings, and they are going through something terrible, and I don't know the solution for it. I don't know how to resolve it for them, but I do recognize it. And and even I even the people that are calling for ceasefire um, and are we ask them, how come you're only looking at that? You're not looking at the hostages. You're not looking at the people that were killed, etc. It's a very human, empathetic response, and I recognize that, and I wouldn't expect anything different, certainly from a Palestinian or a Muslim. I just don't know how to. I don't know what else could happen, but I'm trying not to close that down at the
Um,
same.
yeah. She said something that I've been feeling and feeling, but she meant it from our side. She said it robbed what happened on October 7th is robbing her of the ability to feel compassion for what's happening in Gaza. That's exactly how I feel. She said, but she's working on it.
Right. The same thing. It's this.
Yes.
We have to, as painful as it is, it might be impossible to fully hold both at the same time. And I've always felt that war, it just is inexplicable. I mean, and when the Torah discusses war and conquest, it's for me, it's almost, it's like at the level of a chok. And so, like when my son brought up in before October 7th, like a few weeks before, my son and I were engaged in this sort of loud disagreement about genocide, and he was he was talking about wiping out Amalek, and he just doesn't understand genocide. And I kept on saying, why are you comfortable with war? You're all upset about genocide. I can't get my head around just plain war. To me, the distinction between war and genocide is like semantics almost. I just don't, once there's war, and war means collateral, what they call collateral damage, and for some reason that's acceptable. I don't understand that, so I don't. And in the beginning, again, there's stages. This is my own personal avoda. I wouldn't say this to, I wouldn't demand this of anybody else that they should do it. But it's to realize that there is no them. There's only us. But it's just, part of the thing of empathy is that because of it, we feel pain. And because we feel pain, we just want the pain to stop. We just want the pain to stop, which is a very human response to pain. I mean, that's what happens when I have pain. I just want it to stop. And depending on the level of pain, I don't care what it takes for it to stop. At some point, I just want it to stop. But we know that that's not how ultimately we need to live. We need to still make the right decisions, and we can't, just because I'm in pain and I want it to stop, I can't allow that to dictate what I do. Ultimately, I still have to do the right thing, and but
right.
it's
right.
just
I know.
very painful.
Believe me, I understand about war, and David is sitting here so he can verify. People think I'm crazy. I constantly, for years and years and years, talk about the fact that what humans could accomplish, and they can't think of a way to stop war. I can't even understand it.
Right. I remember one time I was driving with Rabbi Cardoza. He had I don't remember what it was, but he had like a free day in Chicago. So I asked him what would he like to do, and so I took him to the Museum of Science and Industry. I took him to the museums, like we went down to the different museums. We stopped by the Art Museum and Museum of Science and Industry. And in the Museum of Science and Industry, we watched one of those IMAX films about space, the human conquest of space or whatever. And then we were driving back, and he asked me about these buildings, and I told him they are projects. They were the projects. And he chuckled. He said, "We just watched a movie about the, the glory of human achievement, and then we have this problem here that is, the simplest. I mean, the most difficult, but the simplest of problems, poverty and violence and all that kind of stuff. And that it's right in front of us, but we instead we distract ourselves by watching a movie about space. But the thing that's actually, like right in front of us, we can't solve it. It's like, I know.
I agree.
I don't get how it's in the Torah. That's the thing. I don't have to understand everything. I don't understand it. I don't understand how it's in the Torah. I don't understand why. There is that path where that people suggest that the Torah, like they say this about slavery, they say this about, the Rambam says this about korbanos, after receiving the Torah, we're meant to evolve, and that the Torah is meant to help us evolve, and there are going to be things that were acceptable that are no longer going to be acceptable. Things like slavery and war eventually seems to be one of those things, because it says that, in Yeshayahu and in other places, eventually when Mashiach comes, there will be no more war. So it sounds like that even though the Torah begins with wars and God commanding wars, that there's some expectation that living with the Torah eventually is going to bring us to a place where there won't be any more war. That just makes the original thing, especially God commanding a war.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing. So for me, I can't get my brain on it, but whatever.
Yes.
But so when I see people, just taking what many of us would consider the other side of the conflict, even though it hurts tremendously, I have to keep on reminding myself that it's not an inhuman response to take the other side. It's a human response. It's just, it's not, but still may not be right, may not be correct, but it's still human, and I need to stay human too. Okay, other mitzvahs in treating the victims first. 5 other mitzvahs, both positive and negative, are involved in treating the victims. Do we push off the fulfillment of these 5 other mitzvahs on account of Ava? Or should we first fulfill these mitzvahs? So there are positive mitzvahs. Vahashevoso lo. The verse in Parshat Ki-Tetzei discusses the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. This is returning a lost object. Returning an object with the words Vahashevoso lo, you shall return it to him. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, however, includes within this understanding of these words the obligation of returning his own life to him as well. In other words, this is not just about returning objects to another person, but even returning their life, or life, what we would call life force. For example, if thieves are threatening to pounce upon him, there's an obligation of Vahashevoso lo. In other words, not just if they're trying to take away his items, but they're trying to take him away or kill him. This verse is the source of the mitzvah of saving someone's life. Isn't that weird? But it is. It's often quoted. It's also, some argue, I think the Rambam even says this, even though he's going to quote, I think the Rambam says that this is the source of the mitzvah for a doctor to heal. Even though there's a pasuk in last week's Torah portion that says "V'rapo yirapeh," and the healer will heal. So, so you would think that's the source of the mitzvah for doctors to heal, but the Rambam doesn't quote it as the source. I'm almost positive the Rambam quotes this mitzvah as the source for the mitzvah for a doctor to heal. This verse is a source of the mitzvah of saving someone's life. It is highly probable, but it is a general mitzvah that the Shulchan Aruch refers to in the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 325.
And the verse that you shall surely heal isn't that? I thought it was coming as giving permission.
Right. So that's how the
Ramban
learned it. That's how Nachmanides learns it.
Yeah,
Not
but
every,
but it doesn't follow that you have an obligation to heal.
That's the Ramban, Nachmanides. But there are many other poskim who hold that that's the source for the mitzvah of somebody. It's a discussion amongst commentaries, and the Ramban holds, like you're saying, that it's the permission to heal. Otherwise, you would think that God decided this person's sick. It's up to God to heal them. So this is telling you that there's permission to heal. It is a discussion. The Rambam doesn't quote it as the source, but when you're looking at it in the text, it certainly if you were looking for where is there a mitzvah to heal, you would assume it was there. But again, like you were saying, it seems like many understand it differently. It's not that isn't it. So it's a kind of indirect and almost surprising source that this mitzvah of returning a lost item is where you would find it. Now he doesn't mention it, but I'm almost positive that this is the mitzvah that this is the source that the Rambam himself quotes as the source for the mitzvah to heal. V'chai achicha imoch. So your brother shall live with you. The She'iltus, based upon the Gemara Bava Metzia, understands these words to indicate an obligation to save others with you. The Netziv, in his Emek HaShe'ela, which is a commentary on the She'iltus, understands it as a full-fledged obligation according to all opinions. He writes that he must exert every effort to save a friend's life until it becomes pikuach nefesh for himself. So there's this whole discussion about putting yourself at risk to save somebody else's life. Are you obliged to put yourself at risk to save somebody else's life? And this is it. That it ends up that when you're reading like practical halacha about things like kidney transplants or other kinds or I don't know, even you call it stem cell. What call it when they take cells from your spinal fluid? Is it stem cells?
I think so.
Yeah. So when somebody there's certain kinds of leukemia where they're looking for a donation. Oh, I lost the words. Whatever. Yeah. So there's discussion about do you have to do it first of all if there's some risk to you, and then let's say you want to do it. How much risk are you allowed to assume before it becomes problematic to help somebody else? And certainly you could imagine, like, let's say with life-saving, let's say somebody fell into the water. Are you allowed to dive into the water to save them? Especially there are so many cases where people dive in and they drown trying to save somebody else. So are you even allowed to dive in to save them? And then under what circumstances would be allowed to? I remember as a teenager, I took life-saving to be a lifeguard. And a big part of the training was how not to die while you're trying to save somebody else. I would say that was most of the training. Most of the training was how to save somebody else without dying. So so things like that, this question comes up. And so I guess that's I guess the Netziv would be one of the sources you'd bring with regard to this. The Ramban, Torah Sa'adam Shar HaSakana, so this is one of his works, understands the verse, love your neighbor as yourself, as a directive to save him from medical danger as well. So the Ramban would find the source for the work of a doctor. He was a doctor also. He finds the source in B'Havtarecha Kamocha. So those are positive commandments. Again, in the specific case we're dealing with, which is saving lives, these are the positive commandments that would apply to Jews, because it's V'chai achicha imak, your brother with you, L're'acha, your neighbor or friend, and also the positive commandment of returning a lost object. In there is language that makes it sound like it's particularly for Jews. So this would be a mitzvah to take care of the Jew who is the victim of the terrorists, and you're setting that aside in order to take care of the terrorist. So those are positive commandments that you'd be setting aside. And then the negative commandments, lo samar adam ri'echa, you cannot stand by your brother's blood. Again, that would apply to Jews. There's a negative commandment of not standing idly by your brother's blood as well. This is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch and in the Rambam. Collectively, if we adopt such a policy in having armed people in every base medrash in Israel, we can ensure that we do not stand idly by our brother's blood. I don't know why he brought that up. I don't know what that's doing. Lo suchal lihishalem, lehis alem. You cannot ignore. There's yet another negative commandment associated with the positive commandment of returning a lost object. And this is in that verse in that same section. You cannot shut your eyes to it. So if you saw something that's a lost object belonging to somebody, you're not allowed to ignore it. So again, if we say this mitzvah applies even to healing people, that means you can't stand by, you can't ignore it. This verse comes directly after the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. The Netziv refers to this mitzvah as well. It's funny that when they talk about these kind of laws, they call it the Good Samaritan law, which is that if you're standing by while somebody's in danger and you don't try to help, you could be in violation of what they call the Good Samaritan law. It's funny that they associate it with the Samaritans and not with the Torah. But you
isn't there a story
a
story in the New Testament
about
a Samaritan?
Yeah, that's why they do it. And also these are not overt in the text. These are, not standing by your brother's blood. That is overt in the text in the Bible.
I had thought, see, that's where I never got anything right. I always thought that the Good Samaritan law was to enable someone to intervene without being sued later.
Right. I wondered, as I was saying it, that thought came to mind. I'm just going to look it up now.
I'm not sure which one is,
Right. I know there's one, because the last episode of Seinfeld, they're all in jail because somebody was being attacked and they wouldn't help them. One second. Oh yeah, you're right. This is in Illinois. You do not have a duty to rescue another person. You aren't required to provide first aid. You just can't. Let's see, Good Samaritan Act, Illinois. Good Samaritan law offers legal protection to those who give reasonable assistance. You're right. Right. But there was something about not, all right, whatever. Okay, thank you. That was a good point. All right. Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein relates a story from the Beis Halevi. He is a halachic personality. He lives in Bnei Brak and he's very influential. The issue of reinstituting the Korban Pesach had come up. So this was an issue close to my heart. So obviously people were talking about starting to offer the Korban Pesach again. So apparently it came up even during the time of the Beis Halevi. Now the Beis Halevi is the late 1800s. The Beis Halevi explained that he could probably find a halachic solution to all the outstanding halachic issues. However, to the hate that will cause Muslims to feel towards Jews who are now sacrificing once again on Har HaBayis and the subsequent violence done to Jews, to that he can find no heter. In other words, he felt that it would be prohibited because of Ava to offer the Korban Pesach. Now he's talking about then. I'm assuming that the Beis Halevi would have said that today as well. So this was, directly related to some of the discussion we were having about rebuilding the base of Mikdash. Again, even though this is a mitzvah, which is a seriously, could say, one of the pillars of mitzvahs of the Jewish people, the Korban Pesach, Ava would set it aside, according to him. It's just like you'd think that there would have to be a lot of discussion about the parameters of this mitzvah if you could just have a feeling that Ava is going to happen again, and then set aside something as important as Korban Pesach, but he's comfortable doing that, the Beis Halevi. I'm not saying comfortable. The Beis Halevi wasn't comfortable about any mitzvahs. He took them. He had a reputation. It's in the part of the Soloveitchik family tradition to tremble when it comes to halachic decisions. So I'm not saying he took it cavalierly, but it's still, he's willing to set aside Korban Pesach for Ava. So conclusion, a good argument can be made that the moral high ground that must be taken is to stand up against terror. Terrorists should realize that when they engage in the murder of innocents, they are tacitly giving up the right to be treated before the victims that they themselves have created, even if their injuries are greater. Any other alternative does not provide a disincentive to engage in terrorism. It encourages it. But while this is certainly true, it may be that we don't have a right to place others in harm's way by saying these things publicly. It is the author's view that there are different levels of Ava, as seen in the aforementioned poskim. Zaka is treating the terrorists, so they must hold that Ava exists. Zaka is just not treating them first. The Ava engendered from this, however, may not be of sufficient level to push off fulfilling the other 5 obligations. However, officially releasing that this is what they're doing is, in the author's view, grossly irresponsible. How so? It causes and brings to light more Ava and could endanger others in Iran and Turkey.
Rabbi, I'm sorry. I asked the question yesterday and I just did just a very short response of what Ava again is.
Ava means that others are going to hate you because of what you're doing, and they are going to act based on that hatred in a way that harms other people. So if, even though you may feel morally correct in acting a particular way, but if you do act that way, it's going to create hatred amongst others who will then act to harm other people because of that. You can't do it. And this is not just talking about Israeli soldiers videoing themselves, mistreating Arabs or something like that. That for sure there's no excuse for that. But this is even talking about somebody doing something that's halachically correct, even something like bringing the Pesach offering or other kinds of things which are halachically correct. But if the result would engender hatred from others, that would result in them potentially harming other people, then you wouldn't be allowed to do it. So that was our subject, because we were studying the mitzvah that we were studying in the Rambam was the mitzvah in the Torah to destroy idolatry and houses of idolatry. So the question is, and again, Mayor Kahana brought this up when he was a member of the Knesset, is he argued that we have an obligation to destroy, he felt, even churches in Israel. Let's say you feel that the law shouldn't apply to churches for whatever reason. So, but there might be, let's say, Hindu shrines. There are people in Israel who are Hindu and have Hindu shrines. So let's say everybody would agree that a Hindu shrine fulfills the criteria to be idolatry. So shouldn't we seek them out and destroy them in fulfillment of this mitzvah? So the answer typically given to that is it would engender ava. It would create ava, hatred that could result in harm to Jews or others, to Jews in other places. So, or harm to synagogues and things that would be mistreated in other places. So I was looking for somebody who would talk about a treatment of ava and to provide some parameters. This is not exactly specifically what we were talking about, but it allowed for us to talk about this subject and get just a glimpse at how ava is a part of the conversation when it comes to halachic observance. Alrighty. So that was Rabbi Yair.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so now we're back to the mitzvahs.
Are you there, Rabbi?
Yeah, I'm just looking for the right mitzvah. Sorry. Yeah, so that was 185. So now we're on to 186. That is, that he commanded us to kill all the people of a condemned city, Ir Hanidachat, to burn the city with everything that's in it. This is the law of a condemned city, and that is his, may he be exalted, saying, and you shall burn the city with fire and all its spoil totally. The regulations of this commandment have already been explained in Sanhedrin. This is a city which is an idolatrous city within the land of Israel. So if you have a city where the residents of this city are idol worshippers, and this is talking about Jews, it's sort of a given if you had a city of idolaters that were Gentiles. But this is talking about Jews. Let's say Jews converted to idolatry, and you have a city where primarily the citizens of that city are idol worshippers. The mitzvah is to go in, kill everybody in the city, and then burn it to the ground and everything in it. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says there never was one of these. This never happened. In other words, this is an example. There are 3 mitzvahs in the Gemara in Sanhedrin where it said it never was and it never will be. That these are mitzvahs that are on the books, but there's no expectation that they're ever going to be fulfilled. In each one of those cases, there was somebody who argued. So one of them was the rebellious son. So the Gemara says there never was one and there never will be one. This is a rebellious child. We're talking about child, a rebellious child who satisfies the criteria for a rebellious child. They're meant to be taken out and stoned. There's also it's like a leprous house. Obviously, it's not leprosy. There's a house that has tzaraat. So if somebody's house has tzaraat, under certain conditions, the house has to be destroyed, like stone by stone, and the stones have to be taken outside the city and deposited. So the Gemara says by that there never was one, there never will be one. And then by irani dachas, it says that there never was one, there never will be one. In each one of those cases in that Gemara in Sanhedrin, there's somebody who argued and said, like, so for instance, with the rebellious son, it says not only was there one, this person was arguing, but I was at his grave. And then by the house, it says not only was there one, but I saw the stones. And then by the irani dachas, I think he says not only was one, I saw the ruins. I'm not sure what exact language was, but many understand that Gemara as a metaphoric argument. That the Gemara, this is many, not everybody, but many understand that there really isn't opposition, that there never was one, there never will be one. But the person who's arguing is speaking about Israel. In other words, that Israel is the rebellious son. And so the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the exile would be a kind of symbolic response to Israel as a rebellious son. And then when it comes to the house, it's the Beit HaMikdash. And when it comes to the irani dachas, it would be Jerusalem, destroyed by the Babylonians and then again by the Romans. But so this is a sort of interesting example of a mitzvah that's on the books, but there's a declaration that there never was one and there never will be one. So you could ask, why is something on the books? Why would it be in the Torah and then tell us there never was one, there never will be one? Then just don't have the mitzvah. So somebody might argue that there's an advantage to having it on the books, which is to say that this is how it should be. There's a distinction between what we'll call midas hadin, how things should be, and how things actually are. So I think we've talked about this with an eye for an eye. We definitely talked about it in our Daf Yomi class, but I don't know if we talked about it. But the Torah says in several places that you're supposed to take an eye for an eye, an arm for an arm, a leg for a leg, a burn for a burn. So the Gemara takes it for granted that you don't actually take an eye for an eye, but rather it means you compensate the person for the loss of their eye. There's one place in the Gemara in Bava Kama where it actually brings like 9 different proofs from the Torah text that it's not literally an eye for an eye. And even there, the understanding is we know it's not, the Gemara itself says that we know it's true from that you don't actually take an eye for an eye from the oral law. We already have an oral law. When they are bringing proof from the text, they're just showing you that it's also reflected in the text in different places, but it's oral law that we don't take an eye for an eye. So the Rambam says that really why the Rambam says because it says an eye for an eye, even after you compensate the person, you still need to do tshuva. You still have to repent because really it should have been an eye for an eye, but it's just that we can't do it. It seems like what he means, and this is how it's generally characterized, is that strict justice would require an eye for an eye. It's just that strict justice you can't play it out in this world for various reasons. It would never be equitable because you can't do exactly to one person what he did to the other person. So it's one of these examples where the strict justice would require something, but you just can't do it. It won't work in this world. So the Torah is expressing it in a way, because otherwise, why does the Torah express it that way? If it's not supposed to be an eye for an eye, don't talk about it like that. Just say, compensate the person for the eye. And by the way, we do a life for a life. It's not like we don't do any of it. We do take a life for a life. It's just, you're not going to take an eye for an eye. So why does the Torah mention it that way? Because again, it's reflective of what we would call strict justice. This is what the strictest of justice really clamors for, but there's no way for us to actually carry it out. So it could be, you could say something like that with with these mitzvahs. They are on the books to show us what should happen. It's not going to happen, but this is what should happen. And somebody could say, even nowadays, when it says that, let's say for adultery, there's a death penalty, or for idolatry, there's a death penalty, or for Shabbos, transgressing Shabbos, there's a death penalty. So nowadays there is no death penalty for it. But it could be that somebody could argue that the advantage of having it on the books, even though there's no death penalty for it, is to know that that's how it should be. The strict justice asks for that, but it just can't play out in the world as it is. And so we're, in a certain sense, it expresses the values that we strive for. If you want to understand what are the things that are most important, look at the things that have death penalties. And so if Shabbos has a death penalty, that's an indication of how important Shabbos is. And we were talking about not being able to save somebody's life if they were dying, a Gentile's life, if they were dying on Shabbos. Or not, the fact is we do. But the notion that that's how serious this is a way of underlining how important Shabbos is, and to the world and to the Jewish people. Okay, that is that. I look forward to continuing with these mitzvahs tomorrow. I'm very grateful to learn with you guys. Be well.